Hello, BookTube. Hello, Tudorverse. I am joined today by Martha Jean Johnson, who has just published her debut novel, The Queen's Musician, Mark Smeaton's story. I'm trying to get the glare out of there, but oh my God, it is an amazing story with a cover to die for. Let's talk about that cover. Did you squeal when you saw it? There's got to be a story there. Nobody comes out with, here you go, first
I
round.
did have that kind of, just in the heart when I saw that cover. But, the publisher gave the authors a questionnaire to fill out. What do you want for your cover? Do you have any ideas? What do you hate? Send some covers that you like. And so I'd always wanted it to be about lutes, the music. I wanted, Mark Smeaton's story. He's a musician. I wanted that on the cover. So they sent back about, five or six covers. And most of them were Renaissance covers. And they had beautiful, gorgeous dresses, and the musicians all dressed up, and the lutes are so, just so luscious looking. But they were beautiful, but they were very serene. Whereas when I saw this cover, to me, this cover is passionate. It's an emotional cover, and for me, this is an emotional story. It's a tragedy, so my heart just went to it immediately, and I'm very happy with it.
Absolutely amazing. Was this like in the first round, or did
It
you
was in
have
the
to
first
make?
round. It was one of the choices there. And which is not to say that some of those near and dear to me didn't like another cover, but I thought, well, no, this is my cover. I wanted this one. Yes.
Did you get any pushback from the publisher? Would
No,
somebody
no, no.
have?
The publisher, it was just, friends who said, oh, well, I like the red dress.
Ah, no.
No, no, no red dress.
That is, the cover is truly to die for. It is
Oh,
absolutely
thank you. It is a
fantastic.
beautiful cover. Yeah.
Uh, Um, so I'm like looking at my questions because seeing the cover in the first place was just really what got me to desperately want to read the book. But now I want to go into the whole story that you put together. How did you settle on Mark? Um,
That was I wanted to write a novel about that time period. So I've been fascinated for decades about this. Back since I was watching Masterpiece Theater and The Six Wives of Henry VIII, I've been just in love with this era. But I always was interested in Mark. And as you know, he's a minor character in many novels and films about it. And I just think this story always haunted me because there were, I think most Americans at least, don't know that five men were executed as lovers of Anne Boleyn, including her brother, and Mark Smeaton. And so, he was the youngest. He was the only one who didn't have a title and estates and wasn't a privileged courtier, so he was a commoner. I'm very interested in musicians. I've known some, very serious, gifted classical musicians, and you just see, their love for the music, their love for their instruments, the way they respect their teachers. There's a kind of a life of the musician that I've been able to see, and I thought, well, that is Mark to me. And so I always wanted to tell his story. I felt like there should be something that told this terrible tragedy for at least six people, if not more, from his point of view. So it was always about Mark. There were changes along the way as I thought it through.
so when did you get the idea to add Madge to the Mark story? Because that really the play between the two of them was absolute. When?
Well, it's interesting because I did write the whole book one time just from Mark's point of view. But at some point when I was kind of working with it, I read Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, and the girl on the train by Paula Hawkins. And these are these kind of modern contemporary thrillers, but they use this technique of having different characters tell the story, and we switch back and forth. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? And I'd always wanted Mark to have a love interest because, the novel follows him from the time he's 17 till he's 24. And, if we have any luck in life at all, we have a love, of maybe many different kinds, but we have a love during that period. So I wanted him to have a love. And I was kind of looking at all these references to, there's hardly anything's known about Madge Shelton. So you would just see references to her. So I picked her out. And so then I thought of I sort of reorganized the story to tell it from the two viewpoints. And it turned out really interesting because Mark, he sees things. He may be with Anne Boleyn, days at a time because he's playing, but he's always a servant. Whereas Madge Shelton, she's actually in the family. She doesn't know Anne Boleyn very well because Anne Boleyn was off in France, when she was growing up. But she's near to her. So, for example, when Anne Boleyn has her first child, and it's a girl, Madge Shelton is there to see how Anne Boleyn reacts, to help her fix her hair, to deal with this. Mark hears about it in the palace. It's just something that happened so it really allowed you to play with those two viewpoints.
It allowed you to put her in the room.
Exactly.
All of that.
Exactly. Yes.
Exactly. Did you consider anyone else besides Madge?
I didn't, not seriously. There's so many little tidbits about her. So, Madge, maybe she was pushed into an affair with Henry VIII. Maybe it was her sister Mary. It does seem she was betrothed to one of the other men who was executed, Sir Henry Norris. There are references to her being beautiful and to loving poetry. And, I read couple of historians who actually think that there's not Madge and Mary, there's just one person. And we're getting little, stories about this woman. She was fascinating. She's the right age. She was beautiful. So I just arrived on her. And actually, one of the really fun things writing it was, it is young people. They have a kind of love at first sight connection. And it's really fun to tell that from two points of view. That was a joy to write.
It's a wonderful part of the story. It really. I'm going to veer towards the Tudor side. You mentioned the Six Wives of Henry VIII. Is that when you became a Tudor fan?
It is. I mean, there was Elizabeth R. back in the day, and Man for All Seasons, and Anne of a Thousand Days, and I, just ate all this stuff up. And I always feel like I should have a better story for getting interested in the Tudors. But C.J. Sansom, the writer, a wonderful, wonderful writer, wrote a series of Tudor detective stories. And he died last year, but he's actually one of my role models in terms of writing. He was so fabulous. And I saw an interview with him where they said, "How'd you get interested in the Tudors?" And he said, "I was watching The Six Wives of Henry VIII." So I felt very reassured that he was watching it on the BBC. And of course, I was here in the US watching it on Masterpiece Theater on public television.
Channel 13.
Channel 13, exactly. Both broadcasts. They would broadcast it twice during the week. I'd watch it twice.
Right. Smeaton was not really featured in The Six Wives of Henry VIII. That he's, again, he's a minor character in so many of the stories, and yet he was the linchpin.
Exactly.
Because the only one who confessed to the crime.
Yeah.
I love, I'm sorry, go.
Yeah.
No, I was fascinated by the rise that you gave him. I loved that because, of course, yes, he was in Wolsey's household with Cromwell. How documented was that rise? How easy or hard was it to put that together?
Well, it's not very documented. There are a couple of references to him getting gifts from Henry VIII. And, people refer to him and there are stories about him, I think often, years after the fact, where they tell these very lurid stories about Anne Boleyn calling for him, to come to her chambers. And this is not believed by most historians. It's kind of a gossipy
That's the Spanish Chronicle.
The Spanish Chronicle, exactly. The marmalade closet, yes.
and they also famously switched the order of Henry's wives. So that shows you.
It should raise doubt, yes. So anyway, so there were little things, but there were some references to him being in Wolsey's household and that he was a chorister. But it's very interesting. I'm a big outliner as a writer. I know other writers write more fluidly and more spontaneously, and I outline everything. I change the outline, and I scene by scene by scene by scene. And one of the turning points in the novel is when Mark is, he's having success at court. He's getting gifts from the king. He's popular. He's beginning to kind of settle into his own life. And all of a sudden, he's questioned by Cromwell and accused of being Anne Boleyn's lover. And it's hard to even imagine how terrifying that would be. And then most historians think is tortured into confessing. But I actually wrote the scene where Cromwell questions him first, because I thought if I could get that, I mean, it's such a turning point scene. And so I wrote that first, and then I wrote the rest of the novel, and then I went back and wrote The Rise. Trying to think about, how that could have happened and how it would be, coming from really nothing, being quite gifted and people noticing that you're gifted. He had some breaks, he got some breaks in his life, rising up. And so that was to think about musicians at that time. And so I did a little research on Henry. You could say terrible things about Henry VIII. There are so many terrible things about Henry VIII, but he did love music and he kept a lot of musicians, and apparently he treated them quite well. So.
Yes, he did. I love the idea of writing the ending first. That's the Mary Stuart. In my end is my beginning.
Yes, exactly.
And then go back and find all of that, and figure out where he would have been. I love that you had put him into the coronation.
That's my invention. I didn't find any evidence for that, but I think it's possible. He was by that time sort of known in that group that they would turn to him, and they need somebody to organize all those parties that they were having to celebrate her coronation. What music would be there? So you did get to make up a number of things, which is I used to write nonfiction about politics and public opinion of all things. And so one of the joys of turning to fiction is you do have a little chance to make things up.
Educated, reasonable guesses. You
Yes.
are that is the line. If it could have happened, if it likely happened, that is fantastic. And that was really well done.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So you got a little bit into, how you wrote the book. What does I'd love to go into more about your process. What does the writing look like? Do you use critique groups? Do you have beta readers? Do you do it on?
Yeah, I had, I outlined and outlined and outlined, and I'm generally, I get up in the morning and I write for a couple of hours, and then my brain is tired after that. Then I go on, but I'm sure, you're actually thinking about your novel all the time. And I used to say, I have some of my best ideas when I'm sitting on the subway. You're just kind of sit there thinking about what's going on in some scene you're trying to make, give some tension to. I did the draft of the novel and put it together. I had some people who were more familiar with Tudor times than I am. Somebody who had, spent a lot of time at Hampton Court read the novel just to make sure you didn't get too far away. And then I had beta readers. And, I think they're helpful because when you're writing, every single thing interests you. You're just fascinated by all of your characters and, any thought they have, anything they do. And so you need somebody from the outside to, are you getting too much in the weeds? Does it move? What kind of what did you leave out? What questions they have? So I had a book club read the book for me, and some other people read and got feedback. And I don't know about you, but like I was still editing when they're going to take the book out of my hands. You do not touch it anymore, and I'm still fixing things up.
That is wonderful. Yes, I love it. How did that? One of the things I noticed. I know I'm hopping all over the place, but you have you use first person point of view for both protagonists.
Yeah.
And so, I've had beta readers and critique groups, like some people like it, some people don't. Talk to me about the choice to have first person for both of them.
I never considered anything else for Mark. I think I think my idea was to give him a voice, so I wanted to give him a voice. And actually, I had some fun with it in the beginning because he's a young guy, and Henry VIII is trying to get rid of his wife, and he's looking at it as somebody who knows nothing about politics and sort of from the outside. So that was a kind of an interesting part to write, and his feeling about music and his feeling of falling in love with Madge, and to take it from his point of view. And then when I added the second chapter, I just felt it was balanced, and I wanted to have her voice. And it's very interesting because I think that women in those days, and she was betrothed to somebody who would help her family. And he wasn't a bad guy, but he wasn't the love of her life. And so, to explore how she felt about that. And then she has this secret love for Mark, who is totally inappropriate in terms of her family and her class and the way they would look at it. So it was what she thinks of Anne Boleyn, whom she admires, but she sort of, doesn't really understand why she would want to marry the king and, live the life that she does. So it was interesting to put it in to kind of think what her mind might have been.
I'm still, I love the choice of the
Oh,
first
good.
person. I'm still fascinated by the Madge piece. And choosing her in my mind, I have to tell you, it kind of switched things around because I always thought of Madge as Anne's age in my mind, and I didn't really realize I thought of her because in so many of the tales she was much more of a central piece. And the way you presented her, I was like, how did I miss that? I love when things
Well,
get flipped around.
yeah, she's young. I think I think probably all authors put a little bit of themselves in it. And I do remember when I grew up, and you have all these rules and expectations in your society, but inside you have your own ideas. And so I gave her that. She's an obedient daughter, a docile. I mean, she's a lady of the court, but she's thinking things, on her own about I don't agree with that. I like playing with that, and I also think the her loyalty to her family and her desire to make them have them be proud of her and to help her family, and it's at odds with her, her just amazing love for this young man that is, they can never be together. That was interesting to kind of think through that's like. And I think, it must have, I don't believe that must have been a unknown feature in that time, because young women of a certain class were married to people to invent, that would provide advantage to their families. And yet it was a romantic time. There was all these poems about love, and, so there must have been, this kind of two-track thinking about life.
I think I just wanted to say, I think you really were able to walk the line between showing how she behaved externally and what she must have been thinking at the time, given it, for the time and for the context right then.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about that, as I'm sure you must, because it's a somewhat of a foreign way to think for us, that you would agree to marry somebody because it's going to help your family. Most of us don't think that way. We're looking for our life partner, and do we have the same ideas about family and money and hobbies, and do we like to take vacations together? I think that is it's easy to think that it was a cruel situation, but I think that the young women at the time, many of them were able to take some pride in meeting the expectations of their family, and that it was seen as your duty, and you want to do your duty.
You didn't really have a choice.
Exactly. You had to fulfill your role, as her mother
And
explains to her.
and the contrast between her family and then Mark's family, and the way that was all brought up. I was interested in seeing how you made him a real part of the group surrounding George Boleyn and all of that.
Yeah, I thought that there are not very many records of what happened, but there is a fairly detailed discussion of the execution and what they all said. And there is also this detail that at some point George Boleyn gave him a book, and he wrote his name in it. So there was some connection there. So I just thought that I think that Anne Boleyn, George Boleyn, the other courtiers, they were at the point where they admired musicians and they realized he was gifted. And he was pleasant. He had been brought up to serve, and he knew how to please his audiences, and he was taught to say the right things. So he could fit in, and they were respectful enough of his ability for there to be a bond there. And then, of course, I think when you're facing death, there is one of the little things is that he's always beneath them, but they all ended up in the same place. They all ended up on the scaffold in the same day. And so at some point, the privilege that they had and his, relative lack of privilege, it just, in that kind of a cruel situation, didn't make any difference.
It was a tearjerker.
Yes, it was
wonderful.
I occasionally yes, I did have a few tears as I would go back and I would think, oh my gosh. Yes, I know. It is, and I think it's, to me, it's one thing fiction writers can do, because some people, it's a name, and yet we have the leisure to kind of think through what life was like for them and to try to have them be more than a footnote. And I think one of the things that historical fiction does well is it takes people out of this kind of people who are anonymous or apparently we just know their name, and lets us think about what their lives were like. And I feel I'm glad that readers enjoy that. They have curiosity and sympathy for people who were not, were not the kings and queens always.
It is amazing how you manage to jump into probably the most written about story of all time, of the entire Tudorverse, and tell it in a totally different way.
Thank you, because I did have the fear when the book was finally published that there were so many people who were going to say, "Oh no, not Anne Boleyn," but I actually had a very nice reaction to the book. But but I think this Anne Boleyn story, this is not her story, but there is a mystery there that I think people are still very fascinated by. And, I think for us in our day, the fact that your fate could rest on whether you have a male or a female child, it doesn't. And, why did he kill her? I mean, there's something there that is still, I'd read another story about Anne Boleyn. So.
500 years later, we're still. So after this, like this pinnacle, what is next? More Tudor, more fiction? What's next?
Well, I think like you, I'm really interested in historical fiction. So I do some blogging, historical fiction from any era. But what it really interests me is this kind of, there are the events of history, and then there's human nature, and they are often in a clash, and human nature doesn't change as quickly as we hope it might. So, I write a lot about that. Now that my, life has settled down a little bit, I actually have a list of your books that I am eager to delve into. You're right behind me, and I think it's such a fascinating period. And so that's right up on my list of things to do. And, I've been thinking a little bit about some other novel possibilities. I don't know that I'll go right back to the Tudor era, but I do like I do like English history, and I do think there's a lot of material. There's plenty of material. So
a lot of material and a lot of interest as well. I do not want to forget to say, where can we find you? So your books are everywhere.
Oh, thank you. Good.
Amazon, Kobo, Google.
I'm glad to hear that.
But tell us about your website, and I will leave a link to it.
It is marthajeanjohnson.com. So you can find it there, and it has all information about the book. And my blog is Historical Magic on Substack, and you can find that easily, Martha Jean Johnson, Historical Magic. And it's, I just am very grateful at the reception to the book. And I'm very glad that people are asking about Mark Smeaton. That does give me some comfort.
Tell us about the magical piece on
And
the.
it's just historical magic. It's more just, I think there's something about historical fiction where you open the page and, 3 or 4 or 5 pages, if you have a good writer, maybe the first page, if you have a really good writer, you're in another place. And to me, it's magical. It really is magical. And there's so many, writers that I admire them. And I think that one thing about, there's so many places where you don't have that much choice. But in terms of reading today, just have so many choices. There's so many wonderful books out there, and so many of them historical fiction and all sorts of people that we didn't pay much attention to maybe 100 years ago, or getting their stories told. So to me, that's the magic, that you can just open a book and go to the past.
Love it. That I agree that that is magic, and
It
I
is
think
magic.
that is the perfect place to stop. I want to thank you so much. This was an absolutely wonderful conversation. Thank you. And again, oh, my Kindle is not really. um, just once again, look at that cover. It is a wonderful book. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you. It was great.